They came with 1,000 warships and called it a formality. They looked at Earth, one planet, one species, no interstellar empire, no galactic seat of power, and they genuinely believed this would take a weekend. They were wrong in a way that would echo across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. My name is Commander James Reeves, and I was there the day humanity stopped asking for permission to survive. What you're about to hear isn't propaganda. It isn't a legend yet, though it will be. This is what actually happened when the Keth Dominion decided that humanity's final warning was a joke, and humanity decided to stop being funny. If you're new here, welcome to Monster HFY. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to ruin every other sci-fi you've ever loved. Drop a comment telling me, did you think humanity had a chance? And share this with someone who needs to hear what real grit sounds like. Now, let's move forward into the fire. The Galactic Conclave met on a station the size of a moon. Commander James Reeves stood alone at the human delegation podium. No fleet behind him, no armada at his back, just a man in a pressed gray uniform holding a data chip like it was a grenade. Which in every way that mattered it was. He was 43, lean, quiet, with the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed. His hair was cropped close, dark at the temples going gray. 12 years of fleet intelligence had given him the patience of a man who had learned that showing emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. The conclave chamber was enormous, tier after tier of alien delegations seated in concentric rings, their translators murmuring in dozens of languages simultaneously. There were beings with 4 eyes and beings with none, species that communicated in color pulses. A delegation from the Orath who communicated partly through subsonic vibration that made the floor hum under James's boots. He had memorized every one of their files. The Keth delegation sat in the highest tier. They were tall, nearly 3 meters, with mottled gray skin and elongated skulls that gave their heads a slightly backward lean. They looked perpetually bored, which James had learned was simply how their faces worked. It didn't make them any less dangerous. The Keth Dominion controlled 11 systems, maintained a war fleet of over 600 vessels, and had absorbed 4 civilizations in the last century through what their diplomatic files charmingly called integration protocols. What the files of the absorbed civilizations, what remained of them, called it was considerably less polite. Ambassador Veth Koron of the Keth leaned into his translation relay. The human delegation has requested floor time. We granted it as a courtesy. Courtesy. James let that word sit for a second. He stepped to the podium and pressed the data chip into the reader. Every display in the chamber lit up with the same document, translated simultaneously into 67 languages. This is humanity's final notice, James said. His voice was calm, not soft, calm. There's a difference. It is legally binding under Article 12 of the Conclave's own interspecies framework, which the Keth Dominion ratified 40 years ago. It documents 47 recorded incursions into human-monitored space over the last decade. It documents the destruction of 2 unmanned research platforms. One inhabited way station, that one had people on it, and the systematic jamming of our diplomatic frequencies every time we attempted direct contact. He paused. The notice is simple. Withdraw from the Callum corridor within 60 standard days, submit to a joint investigation, or face a response. The chamber was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then the laughter started. Not from every delegation, some of them, the smaller species, the ones who had been integrated before and survived, went very still. But from the Keth tier and their allies, from the Vral, from the Sothene mercantile bloc, the sound was unmistakable even through translator filters. Amusement. Genuine, dismissive amusement. Veth Koron didn't even bother leaning forward. 1 planet, no colonies, a fleet that our 3rd-tier patrol groups could handle on a slow afternoon. Commander, and he said the title the way you'd say the word quaint, we appreciate the theater. James looked up at him. 60 days, James said. That's all I'm here to say. He took the data chip back. He walked out. Behind him, the laughter continued. What none of them noticed, not the Keth, not the Vral, not a single delegate in that vast chamber, was that James Reeves never once looked nervous. And in 12 years of fleet intelligence, James Reeves had only ever looked calm like that once before, Right before the trap closed, the 60 days passed. The Keth didn't withdraw, they advanced. 14 vessels, a probe force by Keth standards, pushed into the Callum corridor on day 61, running transponders dark and weapons hot. They hit the first way station at 300 hours station time. It was a civilian fuel depot, 41 people. The Keth gave them 11 minutes to evacuate, then destroyed the structure anyway because the evacuation shuttle was 6 minutes late clearing the debris field. 31 people made it out. James Reeves received the report on the bridge of the EFS Dauntless, a heavy intelligence vessel that looked, to anyone scanning it, like a mid-grade freighter. He read the casualty list once. He set it down on the console. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway. 31, said the voice beside him. He turned. The alien standing at the secondary console wasn't human. She was Uvari, a species from the outer rim, roughly humanoid in shape, but with skin that shifted between pale blue and silver depending on her emotional state. Right now, she was almost white. Her eyes were large, triple-lidded, jet black from edge to edge with no visible iris. Her name was Analyst Third Class Sira Voss. She'd taken a human name when she joined the Conclave Observer Corps, and she wore it comfortably. And she was, by any measure, the finest tactical analyst James had worked with in a decade. She had been assigned to the human delegation as a neutral observer. That was the official story. James suspected the real story was that certain quieter members of the Conclave wanted someone trustworthy watching what humanity actually did when pushed. He didn't mind. He had nothing to hide. 31 confirmed survivors, James confirmed. Sira's skin flickered, a pale violet pulse, which James had learned meant something between grief and anger in Uvari physiology. The Keth allotted 11 minutes. Standard integration protocol gives 30. They were in a hurry. They violated their own protocol. Yes, she tilted her head, another Uvari habit. This one meaning, she was recalibrating her model of a situation. When does your response begin? James looked out the forward port at the stars. It already has, she processed that. I have observed no human fleet movements. I know, she went quiet for a long moment. Then you are doing something I cannot see. That's the idea. What James didn't tell her yet, what he couldn't. Not until the pieces were in place, was that the Dauntless wasn't alone in this sector. It was surrounded, in a loose and carefully randomized pattern, by 31 other vessels. Not warships, not visibly. Each one was running a commercial or scientific transponder signature. Each one had been in position for the last 40 days. The Keth had not noticed because the Keth were, at their core, an empire that thought in terms of fleets. Concentrated force. Overwhelming numbers at a single point. It was how they had absorbed 4 civilizations. You mass your power, you arrive, you demonstrate your capability, and the smaller species calculate the math and surrender. Humanity had studied those 4 absorptions very carefully. And humanity had decided, we are not going to fight that battle. The signal went out at 400 hours, a burst transmission, tight beam, encrypted to human military standard. Across 11 coordinates in the Callum corridor and 2 adjacent sectors, 31 ships stopped pretending to be something they weren't. The Keth probe fleet had pushed into a corridor that was now quietly surrounded. On the Keth flagship, their sensor officer had approximately 4 seconds to understand what she was looking at before the jamming went up and cut them off from home. 4 seconds. James thought that was probably enough time to feel it. The first human strike wasn't weapons fire. It was a signal broadcast on every open frequency in the Keth military band, unencrypted in clean Keth dialect. Keth vessels, you are encircled. Your communications are suppressed. You have 2 options. Stand down and prepare for boarding or continue on your current heading. If you choose to continue, understand that this is not a threat. It is a description of what will happen. You have 10 minutes to decide. James had written that message himself. He'd spent 3 days on the wording. Sira was staring at her console, where the tactical overlay had just updated to show, for the first time, the full picture of what humanity had placed in this corridor. Her skin had gone a deep, startled blue. You were already here, she said. We've been here for 40 days. You anticipated. We planned, James said. There's a difference. She turned her triple-lidded eyes on him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed to be genuinely recalibrating not just a tactical situation, but something larger. "They will not surrender," she said quietly. "The Keth do not surrender to smaller civilizations. It is a cultural absolute." James nodded slowly. "I know. Then why offer?" "Because we offered," he said. "That part matters." In the Callum corridor, the 10 minutes ran out. The Keth probe fleet opened fire. And humanity's trap, the one they'd spent 40 days setting, the one the Keth had walked into with full confidence and total blindness, closed. What happened in the next 6 minutes was not a battle. It was a lesson. The Keth lost 9 of 14 ships in the first 4 minutes. Not because human weapons were superior. They weren't, not on a ship-to-ship basis. The Keth vessels had heavier shielding and more raw firepower per hull. In a straight fight, a Keth cruiser would have taken a human heavy frigate apart in under 2 minutes. But it wasn't a straight fight. Human vessels were attacking from 11 different vectors simultaneously, using coordinated firing solutions that had been calculated and preloaded for the last 2 weeks. Every shot was aimed not at the center mass of the Keth ships, but at specific systems, drives, comm arrays, weapon hardpoints, in a sequence designed to disable rather than destroy. Humanity wanted prisoners. That was the part the Keth couldn't understand fast enough to adapt to. Their doctrine was simple: overwhelm, destroy, absorb. They had no real framework for an enemy that was trying, methodically and at great risk to itself, to take their crew alive. 3 Keth ships managed to break the encirclement. James let them go. Sierra looked at him sharply when the pursuit orders didn't come. "They will report back." "Yes, the Dominion will send a larger force." "Yes," she studied him. "You want them to?" He said nothing, which was, she was learning, its own kind of answer. The 5 captured Keth vessels were boarded within the hour. It was not a clean process. Keth crews fought individually fiercely, in the corridors and engine rooms and med bays, because their culture had no word for honorable surrender and several very vivid words for the shame of captivity. Human boarding teams had trained for this. They used non-lethal suppression where they could, lethal force only when they had to. And they documented everything, every room, every decision, every body on both sides. With the kind of obsessive record-keeping that would have seemed bizarre to any species that hadn't spent centuries knowing their survival might one day depend on a court record. James walked the captured Keth flagship with Sierra at his side. The Keth commander, a senior officer named Veth Drawn, cousin to the ambassador James had faced at the conclave, was alive, unhurt, and furious in a way that made his elongated skull flush a deep, mottled red. He sat in restraints in his own command chair, which James thought had a certain poetic quality. James stood in front of him. He didn't posture, he just looked. "You violated the corridor," James said. "You destroyed a civilian installation. You killed 10 people who had 11 minutes and not enough time. And now you're going to sit there and tell me this was a trade dispute." Veth Drawn said something in Keth that the translator rendered as a fairly creative anatomical suggestion. James nodded slowly. "I'm going to treat you according to conclave POW protocols. Your crew will be fed, medically treated, and held in humane conditions. You will be returned at the conclusion of hostilities. This is not a negotiation. This is what we're doing regardless of what you say." He paused. "I wanted you to know that because I want you to think about what it means that we're bothering." He turned to leave. Veth Drawn's voice came after him, rough through the translator. "You cannot stand against the Dominion." James stopped walking but didn't turn around. "The 3 ships we let leave, they're going to tell your admirals what they saw, a human ambush. A contained engagement. They'll call up a proper fleet, 500-600 vessels, and they'll think, we just need to bring enough ships and this ends fast." He finally turned, just enough to be heard clearly. "We're counting on that." He left. In the corridor outside, Sierra fell into step beside him, her skin a quiet, thoughtful silver. "You let those 3 ships go to bait a larger response?" "Yes, and you have a plan for 600 Keth warships?" "Yes." She was quiet for several steps. "James," it was the first time she'd used his name without the rank attached. "How long has humanity been preparing for this?" He considered how much to tell her. Then he decided she'd earned it. "Since we found out what happened to the Orath," he said. "The first species the Keth integrated, 60 years ago, we pulled their records, what was left of them. We read what integration actually looked like from the inside. His voice stayed level, but something behind it didn't. We decided then. If they ever came for us, we were not going to let that be us. Sira processed this in silence. Then very quietly, she said something in Uvari that her translator rendered as, "You have been carrying this for 60 years. Somebody had to," James said. They reached the command deck, and on every sensor board, the Conclave's emergency frequency was lighting up. The 3 Keth ships had made it home. And whatever they'd reported had caused something extraordinary. The Keth Dominion had just called an emergency session of the full Galactic Conclave, and they were demanding humanity be sanctioned, tried, and disarmed. James read the summons. He actually smiled, a small, quiet thing there and gone. "They're going to the council," Sira said, something like disbelief in her voice. "They're going to try to make this a legal problem," James agreed. "Will it work?" He handed her the summons. "Read the last line," she read it. Her skin flashed a sharp, startled white. The Keth's formal complaint to the Conclave cited humanity for unprovoked aggression in the Callum Corridor. They had filed it using Article 12 of the Conclave framework. The same article James had cited in humanity's final notice. The same article that, when you read it all the way through, gave any signatory species the explicit legal right to respond militarily to incursions into monitored space after issuing documented warning. The Keth had just handed humanity's legal defense to humanity and filed it themselves. The Conclave emergency session was broadcast across every major relay in the known galaxy. James Reeves stood at the human podium again. Same gray uniform, same quiet expression. Except this time, 30 billion people across a dozen species were watching on relay feeds. And the Conclave chamber felt like a room that had just realized it was standing too close to something dangerous. The Keth presented their case first. Veth Koron spoke for 40 minutes, with maps and sensor logs and casualty numbers. The human attack had, he argued, constituted an act of war against a sovereign Dominion fleet, engaged in routine patrol operations. He was polished, he was thorough. He was the kind of speaker who made complex things feel settled. When James's turn came, he spoke for 4 minutes. He pulled up one document. "This is the final notice humanity filed 62 days ago," he said. "It cites Article 12. It lists 47 incursions. It gives a 60-day deadline." It was filed, registered, and acknowledged by this conclave's own secretariat on the date shown. He let the timestamp sit on every display in the chamber. The Keth Dominion did not withdraw. They advanced, they destroyed a civilian installation, they killed 10 people. Humanity responded under the explicit legal framework this body ratified 40 years ago, and which the Keth themselves cited in their complaint today. He set down his notes. "I'm not going to argue law with you for another 4 hours. The document is either real or it isn't. The law either means something or it doesn't." He looked up at the chamber, all of it, every tier, every species. "And I think every delegation here knows which one of those is scarier." The vote was 31-19 in favor of humanity's legal standing. It wasn't unanimous. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was enough. The Keth delegation walked out. And as they walked, Veth Koron paused at the chamber entrance and said, in perfect conclave standard so every translator caught it, "Legal standing will not protect you from what comes next." He wasn't wrong. The Keth battle fleet arrived at the edge of human-monitored space 6 days later. 580 warships. The largest military force the Dominion had deployed since the integration of the Orath 60 years ago. It crossed into the Callum Corridor in 3 columns, running full military transponders, making no attempt at stealth. This was a statement. This was the Keth saying, "We are done with subtlety." James watched it come on the Dauntless's tactical display. Sira stood next to him. Her skin was a deep, steady blue. She had told him this meant something close to awe in the uncomfortable direction. 580, she said. "I can count. James," she turned to look at him fully. "I have studied your fleet records, your reserve capacity, the human naval order of battle as of last year." She stopped. "You do not have enough ships to fight this." "No," he agreed. "Then, Sira," he looked at her, "you've been watching us for 3 weeks. What have we done every single time we were outgunned? She went still. We didn't fight the battle they expected, she said slowly. Right, you have a plan. I have had a plan, he corrected gently, since before you and I ever met. He turned to his tactical officer. Execute Blackthorn? The officer, Lieutenant Cole Harper, 26 years old and the best logistics mind James had ever seen in a junior grade, didn't hesitate. He entered the command. Across the Callum corridor, across 2 adjacent sectors, across 17 separate coordinates that had been seeded and positioned over the last 50 days, the plan moved. It didn't look like a fleet response. It looked to the Keth sensors like a debris field activating, like background noise spiking, like 17 separate unconnected anomalies. Until the anomalies coordinated. The Keth advance column, 200 ships tight formation. Moving with the confidence of a force that expected to meet token resistance, ran into the first element of Blackthorn at a debris-dense choke point called the Harrow Gate. The debris wasn't natural, it was seeded. 40 days ago, a dozen quiet human vessels had spent a week converting a natural asteroid field into the most extensively mined and rigged stretch of space in the Callum corridor. The Keth column hit the field at full advance speed. In the next 90 seconds, they lost 31 ships, not to direct fire but to the mines, to the rigged asteroids, to the prepositioned torpedo spreads that activated in a cascading sequence designed to create maximum disorientation in minimum time. The Keth column stopped advancing. It started trying to reverse. And that's when the human fleet, smaller, faster, running in dispersed hunter formations rather than concentrated lines, came in from the flanks. It was not elegant. It was not clean. Ships on both sides were hit and hit hard. James had 31 vessels confirmed dead or crippled within the first 20 minutes, and he felt each one like a physical impact. But the Keth formation was in chaos. They had trained to fight a massed human fleet head-on. They had no doctrine for 17 simultaneous dispersed contacts that refused to consolidate, that kept moving, that coordinated through tight beam relays the Keth jammers couldn't find. Second column is splitting, Cole reported from Tactical. They're trying to flank the flankers. Let them commit, James said. When they're fully extended, ping Task Force 7. 7 is ready, sir. James looked at the display. The second Keth column, another 180 ships, had broken formation trying to outmaneuver humanity's flanking elements. They had moved exactly the way the model said they would. They had extended into exactly the space humanity had left open. Ping 7, James said. From a third direction, one the Keth had not anticipated, had not modeled, had not even known was possible because it required threading a navigable path through a hazard zone that every galactic chart marked as impassable. 30 human warships dropped out of emergency. Jumped directly into the extended column's blind side. Captain Sarah Mitchell had spent 3 weeks mapping that hazard zone. She had done it quietly without anyone knowing because if it worked it was a tactical masterstroke and if it failed it was a court-martial. It worked. The second column folded. On the Dauntless, Sierra's skin had gone a color James had never seen before, a deep, saturated gold. He had no idea what it meant. He didn't ask. He was watching 600 enemy ships try to reorganize in chaos. Their third column is holding back, Cole said. 200 ships, they're not advancing. They're watching, James said. Waiting for orders, waiting to see if they need to run. He stood there for another 10 seconds in which 40,000 Keth sailors were fighting and dying and trying to find a formation that made sense, and then he picked up the open channel relay. Keth Fleet, this is Commander James Reeves of the Earth Federation ship Dauntless. Your first 2 columns are broken. Your third has not yet committed. I am opening a withdrawal corridor, coordinates transmitting now, and I am giving you 30 minutes to use it. Wounded vessels will not be fired upon. I repeat, wounded vessels will not be fired upon. This corridor is your choice to take. He set the relay down. Sierra turned to him. The gold in her skin was still there, and now he could see it was mixed with something paler. You're offering them a way out now, in the middle of this? Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because we're not trying to destroy the Keth, we're trying to make them stop. She processed this. Then very carefully, she said, my people were integrated 42 years ago, partial absorption. We kept our government but lost 3 outer systems. Her voice didn't change in pitch, but something in it shifted. No one offered us a corridor. James looked at her. I know, he said. Outside, the Keth third column held its position. The first 2, what remained of them, began slowly to move toward the corridor. It wasn't over. James knew it wasn't over. There were still 200 Keth ships undamaged and uncommitted, and he had no way of knowing if their admiral was the kind of officer who could accept what this situation meant. 30 minutes ran out. The Keth admiral made his choice. The third column turned, not toward the corridor, toward the Dauntless. 200 Keth warships, full military power, direct vector for the Dauntless. Not tactical, not strategic, personal. James read the intent in 3 seconds. The Keth admiral had made a calculation. The human force was dispersed, committed to guarding the withdrawal corridor, unable to consolidate fast enough to intercept. If he could take out the command vessel, the nerve center of this coordinated nightmare, the whole human formation might lose cohesion. It was actually a reasonable call. It would have worked against most opponents. Cole, James said, get me the status of Task Force 3. Task Force 3 is at 60% combat effectiveness, sir. They've been in the fight. Position, currently 12,000 kilometers off our port, running damage control. Tell Captain Hayes I need him to look like he's protecting us. Cole blinked. Look like, sir? We're not going to fight 200 warships head-to-head, but they don't need to know that yet. James turned to navigation. Lieutenant Park, get me a jump solution through Grid 7. Grid 7, sir? That's... Navigation Lieutenant Daniel Park, 28 years old and 3 years out of the academy, stopped himself. Yes, sir, calculating. Grid 7 was not technically a jump hazard zone. It was worse than that. It was a dense gravity shear region, natural and entirely unpredictable, that no fleet tactician in their right mind used as a transit corridor. It made ships come out of jump at wrong velocities, wrong vectors, sometimes wrong locations by several thousand kilometers. It also, and this was the part that mattered, came out directly behind the Keth third column's current position. Jump solution ready, Park said. His voice was impressively steady for someone who looked like he very much did not want to enter Grid 7. Sierra, James said, you should strap in. She reached for the restraint harness without a word. Her skin was that deep gold again. I want to note for the record, she said quietly, that I find this plan extremely concerning. Noted, James said. Jump. The Dauntless dropped into Grid 7. It was not smooth. It was 37 seconds of the universe deciding that physics were suggestions, where the hull groaned and every sensor board went white, and James gripped the console with both hands and thought. With complete clarity, about a briefing room on Earth 3 years ago where a fleet engineer had shown him this gravity shear pattern and said, casually, you know. A ship that knew the pattern could thread it, it'd be rough but survivable. He had filed that away. He had filed a lot of things away. They came out of jump exactly where Daniel Park's solution said they would, 4,200 kilometers off the Keth third column's aft. At an angle that put the entire formation between them and the distant remnants of the first 2 columns. The Keth sensors had not been looking there, because no one rational went through Grid 7. James had maybe 60 seconds before they adapted. All weapons, target command elements only, flag vessels, communications ships, tactical coordination nodes. Fire. The Dauntless hit the Keth third column from behind with everything it had. It wasn't enough to destroy them. 1 ship against 200 was never going to be a clean victory. But it didn't need to be. The point was the chaos. The point was that the Keth admiral had just had his carefully committed attack vector destroyed by an enemy vessel that had appeared from an impossible direction. And every Keth tactical officer in the column was now dealing with the existential problem of not knowing where else a human ship might appear from. Task Force 3 arrived 40 seconds later, then Task Force 9, then the dispersed elements of the flanking screen, pulling back and consolidating faster than the Keth had thought possible. The third column, caught between the consolidated human elements converging from 3 directions, and the knowledge that their jump routes might have human ships in them, made the only real choice left. They scattered, not a retreat. A full scatter, every ship for itself, making individual jumps in separate directions, abandoning formation doctrine entirely. It was the worst possible outcome for a military force and the best possible outcome for the humans pursuing them. Because scattered ships don't fight, they run. And running ships are not burning human stations or killing evacuation shuttles 6 minutes too slow. James stood at the console and watched the Keth fleet dissolve from the tactical display, one by one, jumping away into the dark. When the last one cleared the display, the bridge was quiet. Cole Harper spoke first. Confirmed, no Keth vessels remaining in the Callum corridor or adjacent sectors. He paused. Sir, we have 44 ships with combat damage, 11 are severe. Casualty figures are, he stopped, still coming in. When you have them, James said, bring them to me personally. Yes, sir. Sierra unclipped from her restraint harness and stood. She was perfectly still for a moment, and her skin moved through colors James had no names for, a slow, rolling sequence from gold to silver to a deep, quiet blue that settled and stayed. James, she said, yeah, you went through grid 7. We did, on a calculated solution. On the best solution we could build in 4 minutes, yes. She was quiet for a long moment. My analysts back at the Conclave Observer Station have been running projections since this engagement began. They assigned humanity a 19% probability of achieving tactical success against the full Keth fleet. She paused. They considered that generous. James almost smiled. What do they assign us now? They stopped running projections, she said. They said the model kept returning errors because it could not account for the variables. She tilted her head. I believe the lead analyst's exact words were that humans appear to treat probability as a suggestion. This time James did smile. Small, tired there and gone. Get some rest, he said. We're going back to the conclave in 72 hours. She looked at him steadily. Is it over? He looked at the display, empty now, clear, the corridor quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks. He thought about the casualty numbers still coming in. He thought about 10 people in an evacuation shuttle with 11 minutes and 6 minutes too little. He thought about Sierra's 3 outer systems and the Orath's records and the 4 civilizations and 60 years of reading and waiting. The fighting part, he said, is over. The second conclave session was nothing like the first. The chamber that had laughed at humanity's warning was now a room of very careful silences. James stood at the podium one last time. He hadn't slept much in 3 days, and he hadn't bothered hiding it. He looked like a man who had been in a war because he had been. He laid out humanity's terms, not demands. Terms legally structured, documented, built on the conclave's own frameworks because humanity had learned. 60 years ago and again 60 days ago and again 3 days ago. That the paper mattered as much as the guns. The Keth Dominion would withdraw from all disputed corridors. The absorbed outer systems of the Uvari, Sierra's people, would be returned. A joint tribunal would examine the integration records of all 4 previously absorbed civilizations. Keth POWs would be returned immediately. Human and allied casualties would be formally acknowledged and compensated under conclave law. The alternative, James said, was that humanity would consider the current ceasefire a temporary condition. Nobody laughed. The vote was 44-6. Even the Vral, who had allied with the Keth at the start of this, voted yes. The Keth delegation signed. Veth Koron, the same ambassador who had called humanity's warning theater, pressed his seal to the treaty document in a silence that had the specific texture of a man who would spend the rest of his life replaying the last 60 days and finding exactly where he should have made different choices. James watched him sign. He felt no satisfaction in it. He felt something quieter and heavier than that, the knowledge that it had worked and the knowledge of what it had cost to make it work, and the understanding that those 2 things would always live together. After the session in the corridor outside the chamber, Sierra found him. She was in formal Uvari observer dress, structured and silver, with the subtle color-shifting panels that were traditional for her species in diplomatic settings. She looked somehow both older and lighter than she had 3 weeks ago. I have submitted my report to the Conclave Observer Corps, she said. What did you conclude? She was quiet for a moment, in the way she got quiet when she was choosing words for something that didn't quite translate. I concluded, she said carefully, that I misunderstood what humanity was. I had read your history, your wars, your violence, your political failures. I believed you were a young, aggressive species that had not yet learned restraint. She paused. I was wrong. You had learned restraint. You had practiced it for 60 years. You issued warnings. You filed paperwork. You offered corridors and surrender terms and evacuation windows. Her skin moved slowly toward that deep gold. And the galaxy ignored all of it. Because you were small and alone, and they assumed that the warnings of a small, alone species do not need to be taken seriously. James nodded slowly. And you'd like to say something for the record, he said. Yes. She turned, and her voice was steady and clear, and the corridor's ambient recording system was absolutely capturing every word. Humanity warned the Galactic Conclave. Humanity warned the Keth Dominion. Humanity gave deadlines and documents and legal framework and off-ramps. She paused. Every word of the warning was true. Every consequence was earned, and the galaxy chose this outcome, not humanity. James looked at her for a long moment. Thank you, he said. She tilted her head, recalibrating. I did not do it for you. I did it because it was accurate. I know, he said. That's why I'm thanking you. She considered this. Then something shifted in her expression. The Uvari equivalent of a reluctant smile, he thought, though he wasn't entirely certain. You are a very strange species. Yeah, James Reeves said, looking out at the stars beyond the station's viewport. We've heard that. And somewhere on 67 relay feeds broadcast across the galaxy, Sierra's statement was already playing. On Keth stations, where the integration records of 4 civilizations were about to become front-page news. On Uvari colony worlds, where 3 outer systems were being written back into the map. In the offices of conclave delegates, who were quietly, carefully, reconsidering every assumption they had carried about what humanity was, and what humanity would do, and how seriously the warnings of small, alone species needed to be taken. Humanity had warned them. Every word of the warning was true. And the galaxy, finally, at enormous cost, in the particular way that lessons learned late are always learned, was listening now.